All right, guys, let's finish this little part right here. So, the free enterprise system is a profit and loss system. As already noted, any measures to ease the adjustment to sudden changes should be applied even handily to domestic and foreign trade. So here we're on the tyranny of controls, chapter 2. We came from the economic case for free trade. Let's finish that up. So the economic case for free trade. Free to choose, chapter 2, the tyranny of control. The economic case for free trade. Let's finish it up. This is part 2 of that little subsection. In any event, disturbances are likely to be temporary. Suppose that for whatever reason Japan decided to subsidize steel very heavily. If no additional tariffs or quotas were imposed, imports of steel into the United States would go up sharply. That would drive down the price of steel in the United States and force steel producers to cut their output, causing unemployment in the steel industry. That would drive down the price of steel in the United States. It would have to, because it would force them to want to sell some and force steel producers to cut their output. Because they're not going to want to sell anymore because it's so cheap, causing unemployment. On the other hand, products made of steel could be purchased more cheaply. Buyers of such products would have extra money to spend on other things. The demand for other items would go up, as would employment in enterprises producing those items. Of course, it would take time to absorb the now unemployed steel workers. However, to balance that effect, workers in other industries who had been unemployed would find jobs available. There need to be no net loss of employment. And there would be a gain in output because workers no longer needed to produce steel would be available to produce something else. The same fallacy of looking at only one side of the issue is present when tariffs are urged in order to add to employment. If tariffs are imposed on, say, textiles, that will add to output and employment in the domestic textile industry. However, foreign producers would no longer can sell their textiles in the United States earn fewer dollars. However, foreign producers who no longer can sell their textiles in the United States earn fewer dollars. They will have less to spend in the United States. Exports will go down to balance decreased imports. Employment will go up in the textile industry, down in the export industry. And the shift of employment to the less productive uses will reduce total output. The national security argument that a thriving domestic steel industry, for example, is needed for defense has no better basis. National defense needs to take only a small fraction of total steel used in the United States, and it is inconceivable that complete free trade in steel will destroy the U.S. steel industry. The advantages of being close to sources of supply and fuel and to the market would guarantee a relatively large domestic steel industry. Indeed, the need to meet foreign competition rather than being sheltered behind governmental barriers might very well produce a stronger and more efficient steel industry than we have today. But again, he's saying being close to those sources. So that means keeping things in-house. That means keeping businesses domestically inside our country. Suppose the improbable did happen. Suppose it did prove cheaper to buy all our steel abroad. There are alternative ways to provide for national security. We could stockpile steel. That is easy since steel takes relatively little space and is not perishable. We can maintain some steel plants in mothballs, the way we maintain ships to go into production in case of need. No doubt there are still other alternatives. Before a steel company decides to build a new plant, it investigates alternative ways of doing so, alternative locations, in order to choose the most efficient and economical. Yet, in all its pleas for subsidies on national security grounds, the steel industry has never presented cost estimates for alternative ways of providing national security. Until they do, we can be sure the national security argument is a rationalization of industry self-interest, not a valid reason for subsidies. Until they do, we can be sure the national security argument is a rationalization of industry self-interest, not a valid reason for subsidies. No doubt the executives of the steel industry and of the steel labor unions are sincere when they adduce national security arguments. Sincerity is a much overrated virtue. We are all capable of persuading ourselves that what is good for us is good for the country. We should not complain about steel producers making such arguments, but about letting ourselves be taken in by them. What about the argument that we must defend the dollar, that we must keep it from falling in value in terms of other countries? The Japanese yen, the German mark, or the Swiss franc. That is a wholly artificial problem. exchange rates are determined in a free market, they will settle at whatever level will clear the market. The resulting price of the dollar in terms of the yen, say, may temporarily fall below the level justified by the cost in dollars and yen respectively of American and Japanese goods. If so, it will give persons who recognize that situation an incentive to buy dollars and hold them for a while in order to make a profit when the price goes up. By lowering the price in yen and American exports to Japanese, by lowering the price in yen of American exports to Japanese, it will stimulate American exports. By raising the price in dollars of Japanese goods, it will discourage imports from Japan. These developments will increase the demand for dollars and so correct the initially low price. By lowering the price in yen by raising the price in dollars of Japanese goods, it will discourage imports from Japan. These developments will increase the demand for dollars and so correct the initially low price. The price of the dollar, if determined freely, serves the same function as all other prices. It transmits information and provides an incentive to act on that information because it affects the incomes that participants in the markets receive. Why then all the furor about the weakness of the dollar? Why the repeated foreign exchange crisis? The proximate reason is because foreign exchange rates have not been determined in a free market. Government central banks have intervened on a grand scale in order to influence the price of their currencies. In the process, they have lost vast sums of their citizens' money. For the United States, close to $2 billion from 1973 to early 1979. Even more important, they have prevented this important set of prices from performing its proper function. They have not been able to prevent the basic underlying economic forces from ultimately having their effect on exchange rates, but have been able to maintain artificial exchange rates for substantial intervals. The effect has been to prevent gradual adjustment to the underlying forces. Small disturbances have accumulated into large ones, and ultimately there has been a major foreign exchange crisis. Why have governments intervened in foreign exchange markets? Because foreign exchange rates reflect internal policies. The US dollar has been weak compared to the Japanese yen, the German mark, and the Swiss franc, primarily because inflation has been much higher in the United States than in the other countries. Inflation meant that the dollar was able to buy less and less at home. Should we be surprised that it has also been able to buy less abroad, or that Japanese or Germans or Swiss should not be willing to exchange as many of their own currency units for a dollar? But governments, like the rest of us, go to great lengths to try to conceal or offset the undesirable consequences of their own policies. A government that inflates is therefore led to try to manipulate the foreign exchange rate. When it fails, it blames internal inflation on the decline in the exchange rate instead of acknowledging that cause and effect run the other way. In all the voluminous literature of the past several centuries on free trade and protectionism, only three arguments have ever been advanced in favor of tariffs that even in principle may have some validity. First is the national security argument, already mentioned. Although that argument is more often a rationalization for particular tariffs than a valid reason for them, it cannot be denied that on occasion it might justify the maintenance of otherwise uneconomical productive facilities. To go beyond this statement of possibility and establish in a specific case that a tariff or other trade restriction is justified in order to promote national security, it would be necessary to compare the cost of achieving the specific security objective in alternative ways and establish at least a prima facie case that a tariff is the least costly way. Such cost comparisons are seldom made in practice. Prima facie, what is that? On my phone. Prima facie. I don't want to keep that on my school right here. It's getting late on Friday. Prima facie. Based on first impression, accepted as correct until proved otherwise. Accepted as correct until proven otherwise. Accepted as correct until proven otherwise. Prima facie. On the first impression. Prima facie. On first impression. Human facie. The second is the infant industry. The infant industry argument, advanced, for example, by Alexander Hamilton in his report on manufacturers. Infant industry argument, advanced, for example, by Alexander Hamilton in his report on manufacturers. There is, it is said, a potential industry which, if once established and assisted during its growing pains, could compete on equal terms in the world market. If once established and assisted during its growing pains, could compete on equal terms in the world market. A temporary tariff is said to be justified in order to shelter the potential industry in its infancy and enable it to grow to maturity when it can stand on its own feet. Even if the industry could compete successfully once established, that does not of itself justify an initial tariff. It is worthwhile for consumers to subsidize the industry initially, which is what they in effect do by levying a tariff, only if they will subsequently get back at least that subsidy in some other way through prices later lower than the world price or through some other advantages of having the industry. But in that case, it is a subsidy needed. Will it then not pay the original entrance or entrance into the industry to suffer initial losses in the expectation of being able to recoup them later? After all, most firms experience losses in their early years when they are getting established. That is true if they enter a new industry or if they enter an existing one. Perhaps there may be some special reason why the original entrants cannot recoup their initial losses, even though it be worthwhile for the community at large to make the initial investment. But surely the presumption is the other way. The infant industry argument is a smokescreen. The so-called infants never grow up. Once imposed, tariffs are seldom eliminated. Moreover, the argument is seldom used on behalf of true unborn infants that might conceivably be born and survive if given temporary protection. They have no spokesman. It is used to justify tariffs for rather aged infants that can't mount political pressure. The third argument for tariffs that cannot be dismissed out of hand is the beggar thy neighbor argument. A country that is a major producer of a product, or that can join with a small number of other producers that together control a major share of production, may be able to take advantage of its monopoly position by raising the price of the product. The OPEC cartel is the obvious current example. Instead of raising the price directly, the country can do so indirectly by imposing an export tax on the product, an export tariff. The benefit to itself will be less than the cost to others. But from the national point of view, there can be a gain. Similarly, a country that is the primary purchaser of a product in economic jargon has monopsony power, may be able to benefit by driving a hard bargain with the sellers and imposing an unduly low price on them. One way to do so is to impose a tariff on the import of the product. The net return to the seller is a price less the tariff. The net return to the seller is the price less the tariff, which is why this can be equivalent to buying at a lower price. In effect, the tariff is paid by the foreigners. We can think of no actual example. In practice, this nationalistic approach is highly likely to promote retaliation by other countries. In addition, as for the infant industry argument, the actual political pressures tend to produce tariff structures that do not in fact take advantage of any monopoly or monopsony positions. A fourth argument, one that was made by Alexander Hamilton and continues to be repeated down to the present, is that free trade would be fine if all of the countries practice free trade, but that so long as they do not, the United States cannot afford to. This argument has no validity whatsoever, either in principle or in practice. Other countries that impose restrictions on international trade do hurt us, but they also hurt themselves. Aside from the three cases just considered, if we impose restrictions in turn, we simply add to the harm to ourselves and also harm them as well. Competition in competition in masochism and sadism is hardly a prescription for sensible international economic policy. Far from leading to a reduction in restrictions by other countries, this kind of retaliatory action simply leads to further restrictions. We are a great nation, the leader of the free world. It ill behooves us to require Hong Kong and Taiwan to impose export quotas on textiles to protect our textile industry at the expense of the U.S. consumers and of Chinese workers in Hong Kong and Taiwan. We speak glowingly of the virtues of free trade while we use our political and economic power to induce Japan to restrict exports of steel and TV sets. We should move unilaterally to free trade, not instantaneously, but over a period of, say, 5 years at a pace announced in advance. Few measures that we could take would do more to promote the cause of freedom at home and abroad than complete free trade. Instead of making grants to foreign governments in the name of economic aid, thereby promoting socialism, while at the same time imposing restrictions on the products they produce, thereby hindering free enterprise. Instead of making grants to foreign governments in the name of economic aid, thereby promoting socialism, while at the same time imposing restrictions on the products they produce, thereby hindering free enterprise, we could assume a consistent and principled stance. We could say to the rest of the world, we believe in freedom and intend to practice it. We cannot force you to be free, but we can offer full cooperation on equal terms to all. Our market is open to you without tariffs or other restrictions. Sell here what you can and wish to. Buy whatever you can and wish to. And that way, cooperation among individuals can be worldwide and free. Some things here I didn't understand. Like how it would work. How would it work? Let's see if I could Google it. The economic case for free trade. Freedom to choose. The tyranny of controls. Free to choose. Free to choose. Chapter 2. Tyranny of controls. Come on. Tyranny of controls. The economic case for free trade. Free to choose. Chapter 2, titled The Tyranny of Controlled Milton argues strongly for the economic case of free trade, stating that excess government intervention in the international trade through tariffs and restrictions limits consumer choice, hinders economic growth, and ultimately harms the overall economy. Essentially advocating for the freedom to buy goods from wherever individuals choose without government interference. This aligns with the core idea of free trade, where countries specialize in producing goods they have a comparative advantage in, leading to greater overall efficiency and lower prices for consumers. Friedman emphasizes that free trade allows consumers to access the best and most affordable products from around the world, leading to higher overall welfare. Comparative advantage. By specializing in goods where they have a comparative advantage, countries can produce more efficiently and benefit from trade with others. Role of government.